Let's see, really quick history on 1.9 Wraith stuff and the Scout. Now, the Scout is not my first 1.9 Wraith. I actually had maybe two before this. One for sure, I know the first one was my first Wraith. That thing was a blast to play with in 2.2 with the AR-60 axles, you know, with a really wide plant. But in some of our areas, it was so um, uh, skinny in a few areas, you couldn't get that big, wide footprint through there. And it would just, you know, you find terrain, you climb it, you blast up it, you find more ways to do it, and it got kind of boring. So my first experience with that was putting I built a 1.9 Wraith and I built a honcho, a really pretty cool honcho with homes and wordy stuff all over it. I mean, it was a really cool, it had a RC four-wheel drive, the rear cage on it, really cool little truck. But I ended up folding those axles into the Wraith cage I had and putting together a real simple Wraith. Now the links that I developed this with probably came from that rig, but I mean those things are long gone by now. Let's see here. You see the cage work that's in there is pretty, you know, it's rudimentary. We didn't go into a lot of development. We wanted it to be real simple, something that would come apart real easy to be able to get the cage apart from the tubing away from the body. And so yeah, it was always a fun little deal. Now I'm not sure yet. I'm looking at this cage. Once the other one arrives, I'm going to look at chopping it and putting this cage in the other one without the chopped up windshield. I have to figure something out beyond that. Lift off. Now, when the Wraith 1.9 came out, whenever it came out in the beginning of last year or whatever, it basically had the pattern of what I did was I put that honcho, the first honcho that I got, almost directly underneath this truck. We ran it on New Year's. I ran it a little bit around, got some mileage estimates and stuff on it, kind of figured out how it was going to work on battery, you know, on the lipos and stuff. And I kind of got the feeling that it was going to change. I don't know. It was just always something different about this truck. It was always changing. So when I got that honcho incorporated into this Wraith chassis, it just worked really well. I had to chop the battery tray, so you only could use 2200s, I believe, in this, because the battery tray was shorter. I eventually found some 3000s and some 3100s, I believe, that fit in the little short space. So this, I was able to configure to put the bigger battery in after taking out that tray and kind of figuring out different stuff on the CMS. So it still retained the tray in there. I think I ended up putting electronics in the battery tray and then putting the battery here. I don't even remember now. It's gone under so many different iterations, I couldn't tell you. So you see the hood. At some point, most of these companies had something in this truck. They had some recognition. I know Matt over at SBG said, "Hey, he said, "That's me." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Right there, Scale Builders Guild." And I said, "Oh, okay." You know, that's how I met him at the registration line at an Axial Fest 20, dang, I don't even remember now, 2016 or so. And like I said, everybody's had involvement in this, even some companies that aren't around anymore. So you'll see those. I'm not going to mention them. I'm just going to say that they're there. Now, this is an old Proline. Let's see. Fix my air freshener here before it breaks. Oh, that's cool. It pivots. This is an old Proline CGR body. The old ambush CGR body, the Scout model CGR body. You'll see some classic detailing here. This is actually the marker lights for the honcho, the smaller ones. Let's see here. So I don't have the original bumper that we had for this. It was a real simple, like a continuous hoop with the upright supports, but you couldn't use it because it required the Wraith chassis uprights, and it wouldn't work that way. So what we did was chopped away enough and then got it bracketed in there so that it would line up with the with essentially what would be where the end of the honcho frame rails meet. And then again, I've had so many different things on here, but eventually we had a good amount of the trail armor all around from Wordy Made. And then underneath, real simple. There was some, let's see, how did I do this one? Oh, actually I had to attach it on the ends. It got kind of complicated at the end because everything is falling apart, including the body. That's why this body is no longer usable. In fact, I was reluctant to even take this cage out, because in taking the cage out, I've got to move around the body. And doing that might risk, I don't know what. If I end up using the cage or the interior or whatever, well, we'll just kind of shoot from the hip and, you know, keep what we can from what's left. So this, I remember it was featured in a little picture of Wardy and I in one of the first Axial Fests I went to, 2014, I believe, crossing a little water crossing on the Rattlesnake Creek. Now the water wasn't super high, but you had water all the way down to where it drops down to the bridge, where it starts to grade down. And then, so there was a cool little, you had to have these little crossings for people and for trucks. And we were cooperating. He actually had one of them snapped a pin in the front universal. Oh no, I'm sorry, the PEX pin. And I mean, we were already friends by then, you know, a little bit here and there in passing. And then so that little thing happened. And then at that time, this thing was the stock Wraith cage. So it had a nice, wonderful, you know, steep slope, low profile. And it was tiny. It was on the first Axial Fest, I believe I put a pit bulls under it, but it actually was originally built on top of 1.55 growlers. So you can imagine the size of those 1.55, the gear head, kidney being the classic magnesium style spokes, you know, the ones you see on the old Fords. It had that style wheels on there, and they had some oxidation, so they had that wonderful magnesium look to them. And I gotta find pictures of the video, because it was a magnificent look for this truck to have that nice low profile. So I think what I'm gonna do is just chop the back half on the new one instead of putting this on. Keep it light, but keep it in that class that we have always dreamt about. I might tag some people that are running that class now, where it's this type of a class where something gets built up from the ground up and ends up with some really strong or definite details, or some scale stuff that you really don't see in most trucks nowadays. So I'll come back with more of that later. All right, so enter part 2. Now, my production quality is garbage. I mean, I'm in my garage. Hear air compressors all around, people walking dogs. You hear my family. Refrigerator, the AC pops on, all kinds of stuff. So please excuse the low production quality. What I will start producing are old school vids like I had before when I was showcasing this truck and products that were in this truck before. Just small, short, up to 3, I don't know, sometimes we went into 7 minutes if we had multiple rigs. But as for one rig, man, you could really get in some good 2.5, 3 minute videos, and they were detailed enough to catch people's attention and not drag on too far. But you can see here on that old CGR body, they had a plastic cage on it that looked really cool, but it just didn't fit this application. I didn't have the cage when this came. This was already all kind of half fitted to this. So that's what ended up with the spare area. There was a stem that popped up that had the little twist on for the wheel, for the spare tire. Now you see, this is exactly what I did when the first thing I did. I kind of put it down and looked at it, but the next thing I did is exactly this. We had to look at the mirror action, and you see the wheelbase difference. I believe the final wheelbase for the Scout was 11 3/4 or 11 5/8. It would have been 11 5/8 at the final point in time. Now I did remember what tires I used that I really loved on this, and they seemed overly sized, but they worked amazing. They were the BFG crawler combination with whatever wheels I had around that fit on there. And if you see how it's kind of poking out here, the way that they set, yeah, it was similar to this, to where they didn't seem like they poked out extremely far, but with the aggressive pattern, they did look like a hardcore rock tire, especially when they wear down those wonderful rounded corners. They get all porous and they catch on to everything. People don't like them. They act like, they liken them to the boggers from RC 4-wheel drive, because it's a really cool pattern, but the compound is still really hard. It has its place, but I never really went wrong with those Axial Racing BFG crawlers. Made it with, you know, depending on your rig, whatever crawler innovation foam you want, you'll see their little deals everywhere, because I have been invested in them for a very, very long time, since we started the 1.9 Wraith, I believe, because of the Rock Beast and Deuce's Wild combination. And it worked so awesome with this little truck when I flipped to 1.9 from the 1.55. And it had a similar stance as it does now with the boggers on it. Now, the air gap that they had was a little bit larger. This is actually a Rock Beast foam in here that's been trimmed down to fit into these, and it was intentionally made to not be too flat. You can see how much, just a little bit of tension on there. Really doesn't do too much. Almost a street tire-ish, but with some flex. Obviously, you don't want it too hard, because you start bouncing that thing on the trail and it starts breaking stuff loose. You start literally dropping your balls. The pivot balls and stuff start falling out with the screws, and it's just some basic maintenance you can go through, or some basic parts choosing you can go through. But you can see the difference in the wheelbase here up front and why it had to be short. And we had to do several particular ways until it was mated just right. And once it was, we just ran it. I even put XR width axles on this at one time, and they looked really, really awesome. Now, they weren't the current portal style XR width, which, man, even the axial ones would look freaking amazing under this truck. But this, again, this thing is a piece of my history now. This is a legacy truck. I've had it, it's got to be close to a decade now. And it, again, there's a friend that had a brother truck to this. They came up at the same time, and we kind of developed things at the same time and just ran into each other online and realized we were kind of local to each other. To be honest, Nevada local is within about 100 miles, because that's what people usually travel to go do something, 100 miles. So he was a local, and we finally met up, and our trucks were kind of featured in different ways in different places, but at the same time, and it was kind of fun to watch these several rigs, including several from other cool kit bashing builders that came up with their own combination of these parts. Let's see, let's look at the underside of the poncho for comparison. Oh, there goes the hood. Anyways, you can see this one's pretty stock. I haven't put metal links on it. It's got regular drive lines, transmission, axles, everything is still plastic. This thing is I mean, it's got to be, this thing has to be at least 160 miles, at least, if not closer to a 200-mile mark, because it's gone quite a ways in me just taking off on these little 2, 3, 4, 5-mile walks. Sometimes I don't realize they go that far. They come back with 3, you know, moderately empty batteries and go, okay, well, yeah, I see why it was worth it now, because I have some feedback. On this relatively stock truck, there's really not much to it, other than the external armor you see. I believe this is a BRXL with a Holmes 13-turn Crawlmaster Expert. It's a 5-slot, so it's got some nice punch to it, but a really, really nice budget control. For a $50 motor, I would have easily paid for another motor I used before. I paid like $80, $79, $80 for a competitor's motor. Not to say it was bad, it was one of my favorite motors to use in there. But when I realized these ones work a little bit more in a more refined manner, they became my go-to for my moderate range trail trucks. I don't like to run them too hard for this isn't a jogging truck. This isn't one of the Trailmaster Sports you can just go, flog around and expect to keep rolling. In fact, I need to take it apart and blow it out soon. As we get the new truck rolling and the projects going on, something wild could happen. I still have this truck sitting here, and I hate to alter it, but it would be nice to have that lighter, to have a lighter setup on this truck to actually be able to run it. But it's beyond my budget to do that. And plus, it's got limited battery space. It's better as a short range. Like, you could run G6 style advantage, probably entire stages with this truck, and I've done it at Axial Test. Run 2 or 3 stages. Sometimes the complicated ones, it's one 2200 milliamp 3S battery, just because of the weight and the availability of power is applied well with this truck, especially on what we call the notorious B stage. There was this bald hill, I believe it's north of the pavilion, and they would run this rocky shale stage up and down this hill, and I cussed it every time. But this truck is the reason why that hill is the reason why this truck was built. And people watch this thing hop up and down and over those flat shale rocks and stuff all through that stage. And that's, I mean, if anything, that was the one purpose-built rig I do have, was specifically for that type of terrain. Now, it doesn't have a long range. I can get to 2 Mile Rock, which is, obviously 2 miles from me, on 1/2200. But by that time, it's usually pretty low, anywhere between 33 and 17%. And it's a little bit of a stress on the battery, as they're a high output, like a 60C. But, these C ratings are kind of questionable sometimes, and plus the weight of that truck and trying to push it hard. So it might end up as a carry-only short-range rig, whatever happens. We might actually swap electronics and put a revolver in this, and then in the other truck put in the censored system that's in there. And that's a really old system. I've had it like 5 years now, I believe. Almost as old as our son, because I was able to make a little bit of money at the time just before he was born, and get that thing going really good. So we had this thing running for years, and it was a great truck to have. But again, something just kept bringing me back to this, and this little contest was amazing. So then I get to come back to this, but not in this way. I get to come back to the spirit of this in the way I wanted to, instead of beating it up in the miles, which I got to do with I was going to go 300 miles, but I ended up kind of needing some cash and sold the Mileage Wraith 1.9. So this one coming back is like, okay, here's my chance to now grab onto it and go, you know what? I'm going to do some scale stuff. So I'm going to go upload these things to YouTube. Screw it. We'll do links. We'll even do little short teasers on Instagram really quick. But thank you for coming by. If you want to know more history on these things, now please don't, if you've read my Instagram post, please don't think that I go around asking people for free SHIT. I do not. If you speak to anybody that we've dealt with before in the terms of quote-unquote sponsorship, brand ambassadorship, even just as hobbyists who want to help the business, I've always gone to them and say, look, I don't expect anything for free. If you have these goods and service that you want exposed, then just let us, take a look. If we can afford it, cool. If you let us play with it, cool. Whatever. Just let us do these little things. That was kind of the old school route of doing it. So don't think I'm expecting anything for free. That was just the old school way of going about, a hobby recognition, brand, pushing a brand without pushing a brand, being able to get these things out in public. This things still happen, but with the larger corporation in mind, they have to go with larger viewership, not with these, my little few, maybe 120 subscribers or something. It's not anything big, but it's still people who still come back looking for the 1.9 race tag and come and find this thing all the time, along with several others that are just all over the internet. So if you're curious about the history of the Wraith 1.9, how they made it and why, I can tell you for a fact that me slapping the honcho under here really brought into perspective exactly what could happen with these parts in one of these old race chassis. And, they've shown, yes, it has its weak points, but as for a solid starter design, it is a solid starter design. So that's the end of this part. I did get interrupted by my wife earlier. She's just grabbing some food. But expect some running and riv videos. Again, I'm not looking for a sponsorship. I'm not looking for free stuff. But, some people do say, hey, this guy has this following. And this is a really good time to show where this thing has gone and how it's come to the main market for, wide use right out of the box. I think that's it. So, we used to go between all these places and say hi between the desert and the mountains and the streams and everything. And it kind of sucks not doing that right now. So just to let you all know, the first out-of-town thing I think I want to do is hit up Bud Canyon, right there in North Reno. Hit up the freaking beach hut. And yeah, I know it's spendy, but I can go for some freaking Marley nachos. And then just pound water and hope that there's a bathroom nearby. So that's it. Thank y'all for listening. Oh yeah, and I totally forgot. I can't forget this. This is Driver Guy. This is our oldest son named this guy Driver Guy. He's an old TNA wrestler. He has gold trunks, black boots, and he had these weird gloves molded in onto his hands, and you can see his hands have been cut to fit the steering wheel. This one, his fingers are wore off. But this guy actually came with our first used Wraith, and so he came with the clothes, and over time he had just a bald head. I made a helmet for him, and then eventually cracked. I put a piece of putty or something there to hold it on, so when it would hit, you know, it'd kind of go sideways. If you notice the videos with him, his old orange helmet would often be all, you know, kind of all over the place, because that's what would happen. The putty would get moved, and he'd be all, you know, he'd drive by and his hat be all crooked, and he'd still be holding on trying to come through the obstacle. So if you get to go back in the old videos, it's pretty funny. But yeah, this old guy, everybody always made fun of him, like, man, you know, that must be how they're dressing out in Alabama, you know, with the hella baggy jeans, and then boots, and then, you know, effed up gloves, and then the real ratty hoodie. And I mean, no kidding. I mean, I don't do the baggy jeans anymore. They're too heavy and too hot. But there's my ratty hoodie that everybody has, or your ratty freaking flannel that everybody has. Somebody comes out on the trail, they're all messed up, had to go fix their truck or something, all mad, come blasting out on their trail, like, most of they're wearing is they're wearing that dirty old, you know, that's what they're doing. So I do have, looks like I have some material to work with. This, it's hard to leave behind, but I think we're just gonna have to go with the original stock roof that's on the other rig, and just go from there, because I want to hold ground up just the way this one did. This one just did a little bit of a turn into the scale where others went into performance, and it was a heavy little beast rolling about, and it did a really cool job doing it. So yeah, I just wanted to introduce you to Driver Guy. Don't forget him. He'll always be, hopefully, in whatever Scout we have rolling. I know I've had him in the recent Wraith 1.9, 200 mile, almost 300 mile Wraith 1.9. And that's it. We're out.